Thanks everybody for joining us from across the country for our session on diversity and representation in breast reconstruction. We're really excited to have a session like this at Broad Day, and I think as the session progresses, you'll understand why. But the first thing I wanted to do is to start off by introducing the three panelists that are here today, our speakers. So first, Michelle Audouin. Michelle, if you could give a wave. Michelle happily wears the hats of wife and mom to two wonderful kids. She's a home baker and a doggy mama. She was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer in 2017. Prior to her diagnosis, Michelle worked for almost 2 decades as a passionate educator in Toronto. She brings an equity lens to Rethink's MBC Advisory Board and is a member of Rethink's Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Working Group. And you'll hear more about Rethink shortly. Most recently, Michelle is proud to have partnered with Rethink to create Uncovered, a breast recognition project. Caroline Falaye, who can give a wave, is a happy mom of 2 lovely girls. She was diagnosed with breast cancer herself in 2018. Now in recovery, Caroline is thriving and is working with Rethink to bring awareness to the experiences of Black, Indigenous, and women in the cancer care community. My name is Aisha Lofters. I'm a mom to 2 energetic boys, a family physician, and the chair in implementation science at the Peter Gilkin Center for Women's Cancers at Women's College Hospital. I conduct research that focuses on cancer screening and prevention and try to bring an equity lens to all the work that I do. So thank you to everybody for joining us for this session, which is really going to be different, I think, from other sessions today, because it's going to be really more of a discussion and a conversation, hopefully a chance for questions from the audience as well. Before we get into that, though, I do have a few slides I just wanted to run through quickly. So I will just pull those up right now. Just to set the stage a little bit for what we're going to be talking about today and giving a little bit of context. So specifically, I'm going to be doing a quick overview of what we know about breast cancer among Black women in Canada. So this is a visual of the cancer journey, and this is how we, often talk about the cancer journey in healthcare. So starting from prevention, going through to screening, diagnosis, and then treatment, and then some women go on to recovery and survivorship, and someone going on to end of life care, and of course primary care being a factor across that whole spectrum, and psychosocial and palliative care being a factor as well and being involved. And then each facet of that journey does have unique considerations for Black women. So when it comes to prevention, we do know that Black women are more likely to use chemical hair straighteners and relaxers, which increase the chance of breast cancer, and often have lower levels of vitamin D, which might have an association with breast cancer. When it comes to screening, we know here in Ontario, at least, that women who've immigrated to Canada from sub-Saharan Africa have lower rates of breast cancer screening. When it comes to diagnosis, we know that women who've immigrated from the Caribbean tend to have a longer time to diagnosis when they first present with symptoms, and also tend to be diagnosed at a later stage than other women in Ontario. And when it comes to treatment, we also see similar disparities where women who have immigrated from the Caribbean and from sub-Saharan Africa have a longer time to chemotherapy when presenting with similar symptoms. In the world of survivorship, Black women can often feel not safe or not heard or not comfortable with many of the survivorship support groups. So there are groups like the Olive Branch of Hope in Ontario and the African Cancer Support Group in Alberta that have been developed that are whose priority is to focus on the Black community. When it comes to breast cancer, we also, when we look at the literature, we know that African-American women are at a higher risk of having dense breasts. And there's, different views about whether or not that increases your risk of breast cancer. They're at high risk of being diagnosed with breast cancer at a younger age, having more aggressive or faster growing tumors, of having harder to treat tumors, more likely to have triple negative breast cancer, being diagnosed at a later stage and having a longer time to diagnosis. So that's for African-American women overall. But what we don't know is this true in Canada. If you notice on the slide before, I said some things about women coming from different parts of the world, but we don't have race-based data here, and we need a lot more Canadian research to understand what's the situation right here in Canada. And we know that we need more representation in breast cancer spaces. So that sets a bit of the tone for the session, and also helps to really fuel my fire for the work that I do in cancer screening and prevention research. And a little over a year ago, I think I was contacted actually by Rethink and by CBC. So I'm going to show you a little clip from that CBC piece on the National.
She has a loving family and a new puppy. But Michelle Obasan, in the fight of her life, she's needed something more. She needed to be seen.
Seeing other women who look like me with scars like mine just would have helped to normalize the experience and make me feel more normal. Yeah, part of the community.
Very good. Michelle's normal is a scary place. She was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer 3 years ago. After undergoing a double mastectomy, she opted for reconstructive surgery and ended up in a whole new battle.
I really wanted to see women that looked like me who've had a similar type of surgery and see their scars. And when I asked around, they all seemed to assume that it was easy to find. And then as they, looked for things, they realized that these images didn't exist.
And how did that make you feel?
It was really disheartening. It sent a message to me that my experience didn't matter.
Michelle knew she couldn't be the only one who felt invisible.
Being a Black woman with breast cancer has been a very lonely journey.
So she joined forces with a charity she was involved in to help create this.
We're important and we need to be recognized and represented.
Uncovered, a breast recognition project, a resource to give other Black women the chance to share their scars and their stories.
Leading up to it, there was a lot of sleepless nights for me, just a lot of apprehension about uncovering my body and my scars, because I generally don't look at my body anymore. And I was really, really scared. About the end of the shoot, there was just this expression of joy, relief. It was just the most beautiful thing, that everybody walked in with a similar experience and walked off feeling so much better about themselves.
It's really important to speak up.
It was empowering, and it filled a void that is now being recognized.
I think that's our responsibility to ensure that there's diversity and inclusion in the materials. And I think up until now, we have not done a good enough job.
Dr. Tony Zong is a plastic and reconstructive surgeon at the University Health Network in Toronto. She has done research on the diversity of the patients she helps, but acknowledges the material provided to them doesn't reflect them all. Michelle's project is a tough wake-up call.
So their outcome, their experience mattered greatly to us. So to know that we could have done a better job, I think it's important. It's important for us to learn from these lessons.
The lessons also raise broader questions. It's not clear how breast cancer affects women of different backgrounds or what their outcomes are. Canada hasn't collected race-based health data, but is currently working on how to start.
I think in Canada, we've traditionally seen ourselves as a colorblind society or as a place where racism doesn't exist. We have to recognize what our history is and what's been happening here. And being colorblind is actually not a safe approach.
Aisha Lofters is a doctor and researcher focusing on cancer screening and health equity issues. The Uncovered Project, she says, speaks to a systemic lack of representation in healthcare and the need to address it.
You want to know that you're not alone, that you're not the only one. And you also want to know that the healthcare system sees you as who you are and that they don't view you as an other or as an oddity or as an exception. So to know that there's a specific effort made for people who look like you and who come from your experiences, your background represented, I think is really key.
The new pamphlets are being distributed to cancer care centers across the country.
When you see a project like Uncover, what do you hope it starts?
I hope it starts a conversation like this one that we're having, right? The fact that we are here talking about specifically about Black women in healthcare in Canada is not a conversation that traditionally has happened. So I think it's amazing just from that point of view. This is just one of many conversations.
As for Michelle, one of the most powerful conversations she's had since was with her 13-year-old daughter.
The first time my daughter actually saw my scars was when I brought home a copy of the Breast Recognition Project. Her eyes lit up. She was just so touched She thought it was just beautiful and really empowering, the stories that were shared, and she thought that I looked strong and beautiful, and that really meant the world to me.
Michelle is still fighting her cancer, but it helps knowing she's now part of the picture of what that looks like. Joanna Rumaliotis, CBC News, Toronto.
So I think that gives a great intro and segue to our two speakers getting a chance to speak and to talk about their journeys and the work that they've been doing. So first, can we start with you, Michelle? And can you tell us, I mean, we got a sneak peek in that video, but just talk to us here about your breast cancer journey and how you came to work with Rethink and to create Uncovered.
Thank you, Aisha, for having me here today. So in 2017, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I knew right from the beginning that I was going to have a bilateral mastectomy with Reconstruction, and I was a good patient. I did my due diligence. I read the brochures and pamphlets that were provided at the hospital. I attended the patient information sessions, and there's a lot of support services available in hospitals, and the reason why they have these services available is to empower students in their journeys and their decision making. But at the end of all of these sessions, and when I was looking at these brochures and pamphlets, I didn't see anybody that looked like me. And I had unique questions and concerns that I kept going back to, like, what does the scars look like? How do the scars heal? How do we treat our scars and take care of them so that they don't heal into keloids? And that's something that happens on melanated skin. And I just kept coming up empty, and I wanted to see images and nobody was able to provide them. And I was already a member of Rethink's network, just as a member, just trying to find support and community. And after the murder of George Floyd, sadly, there was a lot of organizations putting out statements about how they value equity and diversity and inclusiveness. And I started contacting them and just calling them out and saying, my experience is different than what you're saying, and I need you to hear my voice. And when I contacted Rethink, their founder, MJ Dakota, she replied immediately. She says, yes, I hear what you're saying. And I just started telling her about my thoughts, and I was really trying to process my grief and my sadness and loneliness, and I started journaling, and I gave it a name. And I said, what would make me feel better in this situation? It would be and my answer was to have images of women that look like me and to create a safe space for women to share their scars and their stories. And I bounced that idea off Rethink, and they said, we have the resources to help make this a reality. We see you, we hear you, and we want to make this happen. And so that's how we got started with the Uncovered project.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle. And Caroline, could you also tell us about your journey and how you came to be involved in the Uncovered project?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm happy to be here as well. So thank you for having me, Aisha. I always say that my journey began in more than 20 years ago when my mom died from the disease. I was 24 years old, and that same year I had my first biopsy and lumpectomy. So I understood breast cancer as much as one can at that age. I was aware of its impacts, and because of the history, I was monitored. I had my first mammogram at age 34, and for the most part, I felt very secure. I was even told earlier on that despite my family history, that my risk of developing breast cancer was less than 25%. So I felt pretty good. So in 2018, on the 20th anniversary of my mom's passing, I felt a lump, and I did what was expected of me. I called my doctor, I set up my appointment, and my journey began. I remember when I first met my oncologist, and I felt very secure. He had intimate understanding of what a Black woman would go through. I mean, he told me right up front what kind of changes I would see. So I trusted him, and I trusted my surgeon as well. And she was a woman of color. So Rethink you know, information with Rethink. I met Michelle, was it 2019 at a mediation yoga retreat, and was sponsored by Rethink, and we connected and we exchanged texts and just catching up with each other. And she mentioned the Uncovered Project, and I read it and I was so moved, and I immediately texted her and I said I wanted to be involved. I didn't know what it was going to look like, but I just sent it to her. I was like, I want to be involved. And that's how I became involved. I reached out to her, and it has been a labor of love, and I'm very proud of how it's been received. It was hugely empowering to be part of the project, to share our stories. My story is, I felt seen, and I did feel that my views and my points of views were taken into account. I was very interesting in terms of how you started off the program. My oncologist had experience in working with women from West Africa, and he talked about that. So it made me feel right away that this person understood where it was coming from, and that helped me a lot.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you both for sharing and being so open with us, and for joining us today. I have a series of questions that I'm going to ask both of you, and then what we'll do after that series of questions is open it up to the attendees who may have other questions or comments. But as facilitator, I'll give myself the first chance to ask questions of both of you. So my first question is that I've, working behind the scenes with Broad Day, been hearing lots of hints about Uncovered 2. So what can you tell us about Uncovered 2? And then just what do you see happening with Uncovered in the long term?
Uncovered 2 was launched at the beginning of October. And part of it was that we still realized that there's holes, there's gaps, that women, after Uncovered was launched, it was really well received, but there wasn't any systemic change, and I was really saddened by that 4 years into my breast cancer experience, if a loved one of mine were to be diagnosed tomorrow, they still wouldn't see images of themselves in the cancer care setting. And that, for me, that wasn't acceptable. And so we needed to have more voices, and Uncovered 2 also includes women from other backgrounds. So we have Indigenous and other women of color who participated. And I think in terms of the long term, I think, Caroline, you can also speak to some of our goals for the long term.
Yeah, I mean, what's new about Uncovered 2 is we have a series of action statements, our wish lists, things we would like to see. As Michelle had mentioned, after Uncovered 1 did a wonderful thing in the sense that it started the dialogue, started a conversation in terms of what's missing and what's lacking. And Uncovered 2 is meant to continue that dialogue, but actually now provide ideas and action statements and to what we would like to see in the cancer care community. So it's, like 1 is intended to be a resource. It's to bring awareness of the realities of diverse women. It's to address the gaps that we continue to see in the breast cancer care community. It's through the telling of our stories. It's our hope that concrete actions can be taken to create a more inclusive and supportive care system. For me, I would love to see Uncovered in every hospital, every waiting room, every breast cancer care support group meeting. I mean, that's the objective. This is just the beginning. This is, we want this to be an opening to start the dialogue and promote systemic change. That's really the objective.
Excellent, thank you. And I think in the long term, hopefully a partnership with Broad Day will be a long-term partner.
Yes, that would be wonderful.
All right, a next question I think is actually ties in to one of the questions I see in the Q&A. So as you know, one part of Broad Day is women who volunteer for the Show and Tell Lounge and who volunteer to speak on their experiences. And we know that our volunteers don't yet fully reflect the diversity of Canada. What are your thoughts on how we can encourage more Black women and women of color to participate as volunteers at Broad Day, and how can we create a safe space for them to do so?
I can jump in first. I think what's taking a step back, I would always want to ask is, what are, as an organization for Broad A, what are your values about equity and diversity? And I think it goes beyond like a mission statement that we're, saying that we support equity and diversity. I think we have to ask ourselves, how do we show that we care? If we really do value equity and diversity, how do we show that we care? So what are the actions that we're taking that are concrete to make sure that women of color feel empowered and cared for? I think it's easy to get caught up in symbolic posturing, putting out posters and flyers with women of color at the forefront, with no systemic or concrete change. And I think one of the important aspects of
I'm not
creating
sure if it's my connection, but I'm losing Michelle.
One of the important connections for me when I was creating Uncovered was to create a safe space. And to do that, I wanted to have Black photographers, Black hairstylists, Black makeup artists to support the women who were coming through here. So I think in order to create a space that's safe, I think we need to go back and see, what's holding women back. And maybe that a show and tell lounge that is open to everybody may not be where women of color are at right now, because the people who are coming into the show and tell typically don't represent them. And so maybe it's already too much of a gap and a barrier for them to expose and uncover their scars and stories in such a grand scale.
Thank you. Caroline, any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I'm a bit embarrassed to say that I had never heard of Broad Day until earlier this year, when it was brought up during a meeting. And it was after that meeting that I did what most people do after learning something new. I Googled Broad Day and learned about its mission, vision, and objective. And it's fantastic. It absolutely makes sense. And I'm sorry that I didn't know about it, but I'm hearing about it now. So to your question, how can we encourage more women of color? You need to go to where the people are, right? You have to change your outreach and communication strategies. It goes back to the reasons for Uncovered, right? If women don't see images of themselves or their stories being reflected, they're less likely to be engaged or to volunteer. So I would say that's the same challenge that any organization like Broad Day will have. You have to look at who you're reaching, how you're reaching, what people are you using to reach these individuals. They exist, they're there, but you need to go to where they are. And that, to me, that's how you can get more participation and more volunteers. And I do like what Michelle also said, in the sense that we need to also ask the women, why aren't they not engaged? That's usually a start to understand their reasons. And I think that would be a good start. Just look at the communication and engagement strategies.
Those are both excellent points. Thank you. And as you said, I think it's about going to the community and understanding, creating safe spaces, right? So that might be starting out with just, a specific show and tell lounge, and then when people feel comfortable down the road, one that could be more open. But those are excellent points. Thank you. So that leads me to my next question. What do you say in response to the inevitable critics, the one who will say that projects like these cause division and that we shouldn't be separating or segregating? What do you say to people who raise those questions and concerns?
I can start. My short answer is it doesn't. I would actually argue that the status quo is divisive, because we're only hearing the stories and seeing images of a certain group of women, namely white women. We're not hearing stories of the Black experience, the Indigenous experience, the experience of women of color. That's more divisive. So that would be my response. Highlighting and sharing the experiences of Black, Indigenous, and people of color on the breast cancer does not create division. Rather, it illustrates, the realities of voices that we don't normally hear. So, so when I hear that kind of criticism, I am taken aback, because really what we're doing is we're highlighting all experiences and not just a single experience, right? When you read the stories, when you look at Uncovered 2, when you read the stories of Michelle, Octavia, Vicky, Ria, Maya, Frankie, and even my story, the underlying message is the importance of being heard, being valued, being understood. So it's about being seen as a person. These are powerful messages. You know, there is gratitude, there's anger, there's frustration, there is sadness, but ultimately we're sharing our story to the system better, to make it more inclusive. And that's a beautiful thing. So, you know, I don't have any patience for that, but but you know, that's how I feel.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly, Caroline. We've had many conversations about this. That you know, when you look at where Uncover, the genesis of Uncover, the breast recognition project, it was me feeling lonely and not seen and not heard, and trying to process this experience and to create something that would be supportive, inclusive, so that more women saw themselves in the breast cancer care community. And you know, does it create division? I would say no, it doesn't. The division already exists when we're excluded from brochures, pamphlets, opportunities to share our stories. That division, we didn't create, it already exists. What we are doing with Uncovered and with conversations like this is we are trying to dismantle the division that already exists and open it up for more inclusion.
Love it. Perfect. Thank you so much. My next question, what suggestions do you have for Black women and other women of color going through the breast cancer journey now who might feel isolated or feel alone?
Do you want me to take? Do you want me to start? Yeah, sure. First and foremost, it's easier said than done. It's to seek out support. It took me a while to get there, to seek support. So I certainly understand the hesitation, the fear of being othered, you know, of not hearing your reality reflected back to you. But there are so many women and other women that you can connect with who understands what you're going through. And that's a start to feeling less alone and isolated. I remember the first support group meeting I attended. It was a support group based on fitness. And at the end of the meeting, 3 elderly women approached me and shared their story. They had been coming to the group for many, many years. They met at the group, and they ended their story by telling me that they're telling me this because they want me to know that I'll be okay. And sometimes, you know, this first day that I attended that support group meeting, sometimes you need to hear these type of affirmation to know that you are going to be okay. And so the suggestion I would have for women of color is go out, you know, seek the help, seek out support, you know, ask for help. It can be, particularly when we're not used to asking for help, that can certainly be very difficult. But the connections that you will form, the guidance, the advice, those are something that it's just worth a lot. And I would encourage women to seek out that support.
I would mirror what Caroline is saying, and it is important to seek out support. It can be a lonely experience, and I think when you read through Uncovered 2, the issue that we've put out this year, you'll see a lot of women talking about the cultural taboo of not talking about breast cancer or talking about your business. And a lot of women found that was very harmful and isolating. So I want to encourage women who, you know, that might be something that's passed on generationally or culturally, that it's okay to talk about your experience, and it's okay to have wants and needs, and to share those with people who are going to support you. So absolutely finding support, whether it's virtual support groups or other cancer agencies in your community, you can connect with people who are going through similar experiences.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I did, for everyone, just put a link to the website Uncovered, just so I realized we didn't provide that before, just so people have a chance to really peruse and learn more about Uncovered. And then I have one last question before I move on to the audience questions. So Caroline and Michelle, if there was one thing that you could convey to cancer decision makers and doctors providing cancer care, what would be the one thing that you'd want them to know or to take away? Michelle, do you want
Caroline and I, we talked.
Go
Caroline
ahead.
and we talked about this, and we said, you know, it's the edition of Uncovered this year. If you go to the last page, there's a wish list, and it really encompasses the needs, wants, the hopes, the aspirations of all the participants, us included, and it goes from, you know, more culturally diverse support groups to having more access to images. Caroline, you can add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. More having Canadian race-based data. For me, that when I learned about my diagnosis, the first thing I was doing is I was looking up research, and I wanted to see what's the data telling about my experience. And there's just nothing out there for Canadian Black women. And I think that's really important. So that's part of one of the action items. Another thing we wanted, and it's a culturally sensitive navigators, patient navigators. You know, in my journey, I had a coach, a cancer coach, as they would call it, and that was very helpful, helping me to navigate to navigate the healthcare system, because, you know, you're feeling very vulnerable, and sometimes you just need that extra assistance to help you through this journey. So, Uncover 2 has some specific concrete actions that are laid out. But if I were to be put on the spot in terms of what is the one thing I want them to know, it's that representation does matter, and that we need to do better. And that we need to see our stories and our stories and our experiences reflected in any of the resources that are being made available.
Great, thank you. I think those are some great practical suggestions and some overarching approaches that we need to adopt as well. So I'm just going to turn it to some of the questions and comments that have come in from the chat. So there's one question that asks, do you have any recommendations for BIPOC specific questions to ask my surgeon? Sometimes it feels like I don't even know what questions I should ask because there's not much specific information available.
And that's a challenge, and this is something that's a great concern of mine, because when I was experiencing side effects and I would, bring them up to my care team, they would say, oh, I've never heard of that. And the reason why you probably have never heard of it is because the clinical trials didn't include Black women. And so some of the issues that, talking to other Black women who experienced similar side effects and found them distressing and upsetting, to have them dismissed so easily because the doctors had never heard of them, that's a big problem. So I think that connecting with other women helps. Things like, skin pigmentation changes. Treatment can cause changes in skin pigmentation, hyperpigmentation. So your skin becomes darker, or patches of gray or flaky skin, changes in gum color, nail discoloration, and scarring issues. How your skin responds to radiation, where typically those that you're looking for, like a sunburn or some pink or redness. And for a lot of women in the Black community, they've never experienced a sunburn, and their skin does not get pink or red. So just being aware of those kinds of changes, so that you can ask them, how do I treat my scars so that they don't turn into keloids? What are the best creams for women of color to help heal from radiation?
Yeah, I can't add to that, more to that. I mean, one thing that I did in terms of practically is I actually spoke with my family doctor, and I sat with her and I said, what questions should I be asking my doctor, my surgeon and my oncologist? And she guided me in terms of what, and I feel I don't remember the questions that she has, but that was an action that I took upon myself to say, I actually don't know where to start, but you have experience as a physician and you're my doctor. Please guide me. What should I be asking? What do I need to know? And that was very helpful.
Thank you. Next, we have a comment from Kitty. So much gratitude for Rethink and Michelle for shedding a light not only for young women with breast cancer, but for the BIPOC community. And then she has in brackets, fellow thriver from the Uncovered Project. Another comment, when I was diagnosed, my fear was multiplied tenfold because I did not see a space where I fit in, whether it be a group or a brochure, and especially at the hospital. So I think just reiterating, as we all know, just the importance and the need for this work. And then we have a question: how have you navigated any cultural barriers that you may have faced in your experience with family or community, etc.? What would you say to someone who is afraid of speaking out about their experience because of their culture, taboos, etc.?
That's a very good question. It's a very good question. You know, I read my story was such, I'm Nigerian Canadian. I'm born and raised here in Toronto. And when I was diagnosed, one of the first things a family member told me was not to tell anybody, you know, and it's such a, just something it's hard to do. You can't hide something like this. But it is a real barrier in terms of to overcome that immediate response from family members. And for me personally, you know, I chose to share my story. It wasn't easy. It wasn't something that I did easily, but I knew it was important for me, for my own journey, for my own healing, to be able to share my story and to be able to tell others. So I didn't hide it, but I made sure that when I was telling my story, it was on my own terms.
I can't add too much to that because I did not have to deal with that additional barrier of cultural expectations. My family was absolutely supportive of me. The biggest challenge for me was putting it out there and exposing my scars and having, you know, all my family members see that, when, you know, that was something that I was hiding for many, many years because I hadn't come to terms with my diagnosis and my reconstruction. And that was just well received and very liberating to share that as well, and to receive the support that they wanted to give me.
Mm-hmm. And just one comment I think I'll add for that, just from the perspective of being a family physician. We know that in many cultures, you know, the word cancer can be quite taboo, or people might not want to disclose, as was raised with the question. And it's a tough challenge. It's a tough challenge to face. But one thing I can say is that knowing your family history is so important. So being able, even both of you, you know, Caroline and Michelle, to be able to tell your daughters your family history so that they know how to look out for themselves down the road. It's such a crucial way to help to protect ourselves, right, down the road, is knowing our family history. And I think it's a barrier that we have to find a way to overcome, because it's so important for us to be able to speak openly. And there shouldn't be any shame or stigma around cancer, because I think too, a lot of people may come from places where countries are very under-resourced, or where historically cancer has been hard to treat, but there's been so many advances. It's not a death sentence. And I think that we really have to face the barrier head on about how to get people to speak openly about their cancer diagnoses. All right, so we only have a few minutes left. So are there any last questions from the audience? Or any comments, any final comments, anything, Michelle and Caroline, that you want to say that you think we didn't cover before?
I think we covered quite a lot of ground, but maybe a plug for the resource. I think I hope participants will have a chance to read these women's stories. They're incredibly powerful and moving. And I just want to reiterate that, you know, this is the beginning, right? We really are looking for real change. And I think it's my hope that this programs like that you're holding today, and the work that Rethink is doing with Michelle and myself will continue, and we'll see some changes next year and 4 years down the line.
think Caroline might have frozen.
Well, discussion.
And I think
I did.
I
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're back now.
Okay.
I hope moving forward that people see Uncovered as a roadmap, you know, for people to have conversations with their families, with their healthcare providers, for healthcare providers to see it as a way to make healthcare, cancer care more accessible to their patients, to make them feel more included and seen, and to find, you know, simple actions that they can take to help improve the experience for all of us.
Great. And we do have, I did want to highlight two very important questions that have come in before we end. One came from Rochelle asking, how can I get involved? So how can people get involved with Uncovered going forward?
Yeah, that's very easy. And it's just, you know, reaching out to Rethink at rethinkbreastcancer.com, joining up if you are somebody who's diagnosed with breast cancer, you can join their network, and we will get back to you, somebody at Rethink's team, to let you know how you can get involved.
And then one last question, are there any groups or organizations that you would recommend for women of color? So I think you've highlighted Rethink certainly as one organization. I will say that a group that we work with quite frequently at Women's College at the Gilpin Center is the Olive Branch of Hope, which is a breast cancer survivorship group that's been around, I think, for 2 decades now, based in the GTA. There's also a group in Alberta called the African Cancer Survivorship Group. Michelle or Caroline, any other groups that you would highlight?
I live in Ottawa, and there's no group that really comes to mind that has that like Olive Branch of Hope. But that's something we're trying to work on.
Yeah, sounds like, so there are a few organizations, but it sounds like there's opportunity to create more. And I think that would be a fantastic thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then just Kitty put a comment that the Uncovered Gallery will be open until October 28th. And then just some comments thanking you so much, both of you, for sharing your stories. This has been a really fantastic session. I think it's been great that you both have been so open and honest and transparent. And I think I'm excited about the possibilities to come, as you said, in these next few years. And thanks to our many attendants for listening in and for all the wonderful questions. I think, Annie, we're going to put up just a quick slide about resources. So just before we sign off, just to let everybody know about the CCS Cancer Information Helpline, and also the chat available at their on the website at cancer.ca, or in the email address is there at info@cancer.ca. So I do hope that between these resources and those that we've talked about this evening, that women will feel a little less alone and know places that they can go to for help and for support.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.